You've already felt completely suffocated inside a relationship, as if each gesture of affection were actually an invisible chain tying you in place. Have you ever had that tightness in your chest when the person who says they love you looks at you with an intensity that doesn't seem like love, but rather hunger, need, a desperate attempt to transform you into something you're not? And worse, have you also caught yourself doing exactly the same thing, trying to mold the other person, subtly, control them, feeling jealous, not because you love, but because you need to possess? There's a silent anguish that corrodes from within when you realize you're loving wrong, that you're being loved wrong, and that maybe all this suffering in relationships isn't bad luck or misfortune, but something much deeper and more frightening. Maybe it's the way you were taught to love that's completely broken. You feel like you should feel complete beside someone, but instead you feel empty, watched, judged, turned into an object. And when you're alone, you feel an even greater emptiness, as if you couldn't exist without the other's gaze validating you, telling you who you are. Jean-Paul Sartre, a philosopher who lived intense and contradictory loves, who challenged all conventions about relationships, understood something fundamental about this human tragedy that we repeat every day without realizing it. He saw that the way we love is often a trap, a beautiful prison we build together, where two people try to steal each other's freedom while desperately seeking their own. And today, you're going to discover why you're loved badly, why you love badly, and most importantly, how Sartre's philosophy can free you from this cycle of suffering that you thought was normal in relationships. Because what if I told you that everything you learned about love, everything the movies showed you, everything society taught you, is actually a recipe for turning two free people into two prisoners, torturing each other with the best intentions in the world? Jean-Paul Sartre was born in Paris in 1905, in a world where love was theater, where relationships followed rigid scripts, where men and women played predetermined roles in a social game that nobody questioned. His father died when he was barely a year old. A little Jean-Paul grew up in the house of his grandfather, Charles Schweitzer, surrounded by books, words, and the suffocating affection of a family that tried to shape him into something acceptable, proper, normal. From an early age, the boy who had become one of the most radical philosophers of the 20th century felt the weight of other people's expectations, that constant pressure to be what others needed him to be rather than what he truly was. He was short, cross-eyed, physically awkward in a society that valued appearance and conformity. And perhaps it was exactly this early experience of being seen, judged, classified by the eyes of others that planted the first seeds of his future philosophy about the look, the other, and the infernal trap that human relationships can become. Sartre studied at the École Normale Supérieure, one of the most prestigious institutions in France, where brilliant minds gathered to discuss philosophy, literature, politics, everything that shapes human thought. It was there, in those halls filled with cigarette smoke and intellectual arrogance, that he met Simone de Beauvoir in 1929. And what happened between them would change not only their lives, but also the way we think about love, freedom, and commitment. They were both young, ambitious, hungry for freedom and knowledge, and they made a pact that scandalized Parisian society. They would love each other, yes, but without possession, without the chains of traditional marriage, without the lies that conventional relationships demand. They called it a necessary love and allowed themselves contingent loves with other people. Relationships that would come and go without threatening the central bond they shared. It seemed like the perfect solution, the ultimate freedom in love. Two consciousnesses respecting each other's autonomy while sharing an intellectual and emotional journey. But what Sartre would discover over the decades, through his own lived experiences and his relentless philosophical reflection, is that freedom in love is infinitely more complicated than any pact or agreement can anticipate. During the Second World War, Sartre was drafted into the French army and ended up as a prisoner of war in Germany for 9 months. In that prison camp, surrounded by barbed wire and the daily humiliation of captivity, something paradoxical happened. He felt freer than ever to think, to write, to explore the depths of human existence without the distractions and social obligations of normal life. It was in captivity that he began to develop the ideas that would become his masterwork, Being and Nothingness, published in 1943, while Paris was still under Nazi occupation. In that massive, dense, challenging book, Sartre presents a vision of human existence that's simultaneously terrifying and liberating. We are radically free, condemned to be free, with no essence defining us, no predetermined nature telling us what we should be. Existence precedes essence, he declares, meaning we exist first and only then create ourselves through our choices, our actions, our projects. We are nothing but what we make of ourselves, and this freedom is absolute, inescapable, and often unbearable. And it's exactly in this context of radical freedom that Sartre analyzes human relationships, particularly love, and what he discovers is devastating. We tend to love badly because we try to escape our freedom through the other person. We try to use love as a way to define ourselves, to give ourselves a fixed essence, to escape the terrifying responsibility of creating ourselves. When you love someone, according to Sartre, you're often not loving them for who they are, but rather trying to possess their freedom, to capture their consciousness, to make them into a mirror that reflects back the image you want to have of yourself, and the other person is doing exactly the same thing to you. Two freedoms trying to devour each other. Two consciousnesses in a battle where nobody wins because victory would mean the destruction of what you actually desire. Sartre describes this dynamic through the concept of the look. When another person looks at you, something profound and disturbing happens. You suddenly become an object in their world, a thing to be classified, judged, defined. Before the other's gaze arrived, you were pure subjectivity, pure freedom, the center of your own universe. But the moment you feel yourself being looked at, you experience a kind of alienation, a theft of your freedom. You become what the other sees in you, or at least you feel the weight of their judgments, their expectations, their desire to fix you in a certain image. And this is where the tragedy of love begins, because in romantic relationships, we don't just experience the other's look occasionally. We actively seek it, we need it, we build our entire sense of self around it. You want your partner to see you as attractive, intelligent, worthy of love, and in that desire, you give them enormous power over who you are. Your self-worth becomes dependent on their gaze, on their approval, on their desire. You're no longer free because you've made yourself into an object for their consciousness, something to be possessed, defined, controlled. And they've done the same with you. Both of you are trying to be both subject and object simultaneously, both free and possessed. And it creates a fundamental contradiction that generates all the suffering, jealousy, manipulation, and quiet desperation that characterize so many relationships. Before we go deeper into why this happens and how it manifests in your daily life, I want to pause here and talk directly with you. How many times have you already changed who you are, what you say, what you want, just to keep someone's love? How many times have you felt that terrible fear that if you show your true self, if you stop performing, if you stop being what they need, they'll leave and you'll be nothing? I know that weight, that constant vigilance over your own behavior, that exhaustion of always trying to be enough for someone who's probably doing the same exhausting dance for you. And I know you've been told this is normal, that relationships require sacrifice, that love means compromising who you are. But what if that's exactly the lie that's destroying you? What if that feeling of being trapped, of losing yourself, of suffocating inside love, is actually a sign that something fundamental is wrong with how we've all been taught to love? I'm certain you're not alone in this. Go to the comments right now and write this: I lost myself trying to be loved. It might seem simple, but when you put it into words, something shifts. And you know what happens? Another person watching this video, feeling completely alone with this weight, will read your comment and realize they're not alone. Your comment might be exactly what someone needs to hear today. So go ahead, without fear, without shame. We're in this search together. The problem Sartre identifies goes even deeper than just the dynamic of the look. In Being and Nothingness, he analyzes what he calls bad faith, which is the human tendency to lie to ourselves, to pretend we're not free, to hide from the anguish of our rhetorical freedom by adopting fixed roles and identities. And nowhere is bad faith more prevalent and destructive than in romantic relationships. Think about how people talk about love in our culture. They say things like, "I can't live without you. You'll complete me. We're made for each other. You're my other half. I need you." These phrases sound romantic. They're in every song and every movie. But according to Sartre, they're expressions of bad faith, lies we tell ourselves to escape our freedom and responsibility. When you say you need someone, what you're really saying is, though you're trying to avoid the terrifying truth that you're alone, radically free and responsible for creating your own meaning and purpose in life. You're trying to use the other person as a foundation for your existence, as a way to define yourself, as an escape from the anguish of freedom. And the tragedy is that the other person can never actually fulfill this role because they're just as free and undefined as you are. They're not a solid foundation. They're another consciousness struggling with the same existential terror, trying to use you in exactly the same way you're trying to use them. Sartre describes love as fundamentally a project of possession. When you fall in love, you don't just want to be with the other person. You want to possess them, to own their freedom while keeping them free. This is the impossible paradox at the heart of romantic love, as we usually practice it. You want to capture their consciousness, to make them choose you eternally and necessarily, but if you actually succeeded in removing their freedom, they wouldn't be the free being you fell in love with in the first place. You just have a thing, an object, and objects can't love you back. So you're trapped in this impossible desire, wanting to possess a freedom that must remain free in order to be worth possessing. This is why jealousy is so common and so painful in relationships. Jealousy isn't just about insecurity or lack of trust. It's the manifestation of this fundamental contradiction in how we love. When you feel jealous, you're experiencing the terror that the other person's freedom might choose something or someone other than you. And in that moment, you're confronted with the truth you've been trying to avoid. They're not yours. They never were yours. They're a free consciousness that could leave at any moment. And your entire sense of self that you've built around their love and validation is revealed as the fragile construction it always was. So you try to control them subtly or overtly. You check their phone. You get upset when they have other interests or friendships. You create rules and boundaries and expectations, all in a desperate attempt to capture their freedom and make yourself secure. But every act of control pushes you further from what you actually want, which is to be freely chosen, freely loved, freely desired by another free being. And here's where Sartre's own life becomes particularly relevant and revealing, because he wasn't just theorizing about these dynamics from a distance. He was living them, struggling with them, failing at them just like everyone else. His relationship with Simone de Beauvoir, despite their pact of freedom and their intellectual sophistication, was often marked by exactly the possessiveness and bad faith he described in his philosophy. They had other lovers, yes, but they also manipulated each other, jealously guarded their primary position in each other's lives, and sometimes treated their contingent lovers quite badly, using them as objects in games of desire and power, rather than as free beings worthy of authentic respect. Sartre had intense relationships with several women throughout his life, and many of them described feeling used, objectified, turned into characters in his intellectual and emotional dramas, rather than being seen as complete persons with their own subjectivity and freedom. He preached radical freedom, but often practiced subtle forms of control and manipulation. He wrote brilliantly about bad faith, but fell into it repeatedly in his own relationships. This isn't hypocrisy exactly. It's something more human and more interesting. It's the difficulty of actually living the truth you've discovered, of escaping the deep patterns and habits and fears that shape how we love and relate to others. One of Sartre's most famous statements about human relationships appears in his play No Exit, written in 1944. 3 dead people are locked in a room together for eternity, and they slowly realize that they don't need torture devices or demons because they have each other. The famous line is, "Hell is other people," and it's often misunderstood as simple misanthropy, as Sartre being pessimistic about human nature. But what he actually means is much more specific and more devastating. Hell is the way other people's consciousness turns you into an object, judges you, defines you, steals your freedom. Hell is being trapped in the look of the other, being reduced to what they see and judge you to be, losing your status as a pure free subject, and becoming a thing in someone else's world. And in romantic relationships, this hell is intensified, because you've voluntarily given the other person so much power over who you are. You've made their look, their judgment, their love into the foundation of your identity, so when they see you in ways you don't want to be seen, when they judge you, when they withdraw their love or attention, you experience a kind of death, an annihilation of the self you've tried to create through their eyes. But if this is all true, if love as we normally practice, it is fundamentally a trap, a battle between freedoms, a project doomed to failure and suffering. Does that mean we should give up on love entirely? Should we live alone, isolated, avoiding the hell of other people? Sartre's answer is more nuanced and ultimately more hopeful than his dark analysis might suggest. The problem isn't love itself, it's the mode of loving, the way we approach relationships with bad faith, with the project of possession, with the desperate attempt to escape our freedom and our anguish. What Sartre suggests, though he never fully worked it out in his philosophy, is the possibility of authentic love, a way of relating to others that acknowledges and respects their radical freedom instead of trying to capture it. Authentic love would mean loving the other as a free subject, not as an object to possess. It would mean recognizing that they're a consciousness just as irreducible and free as you are, that they don't exist to validate you or complete you or give you an essence. It would mean accepting the fundamental uncertainty and risk that comes with freedom. They could leave, they could change, they could choose differently. And that's not a flaw or a threat, that's the very condition of genuine love between free beings. This kind of love requires you to first confront and accept your own freedom, your own anguish, your own responsibility for creating yourself. You can't love authentically if you're trying to use the other person to escape from yourself. You have to be able to stand alone, to exist as a free project without needing their validation or their gaze to tell you who you are. Only then can you relate to them as another free being rather than as a tool for your own existential security. And this is terrifying because it means giving up all the comforting lies, all the romantic myths about soulmates and completion and needing each other. It means accepting that love is always precarious, always a choice that must be remade, always involving the risk that the other's freedom might choose otherwise. But it also means the possibility of genuine connection between two free beings who choose each other not out of need or fear or the project of possession, but out of a shared commitment to freedom, to authenticity, to the difficult and beautiful project of creating meaning together while respecting each other's irreducible otherness. Sartre's concept of authenticity is crucial here. To live authentically means to accept your freedom, to acknowledge that you're responsible for your choices and your life, to stop hiding behind excuses and roles and the expectations of others. In relationships, authenticity means showing up as you actually are, rather than as what you think the other person needs you to be. It means communicating honestly about your desires and fears, rather than manipulating and controlling. It means accepting that the other person's freedom might lead them away from you, and choosing to love them anyway, not despite their freedom, but because of it. This doesn't mean relationships become easy or painless. Sartre isn't offering a self-help solution or a technique to fix your love life. What he's offering is the truth about the human condition, about freedom, about the inevitable tension and risk involved in any genuine relationship between conscious beings. But at least it's the truth, and living in truth, even painful truth, is better than living in the bad faith and quiet desperation that characterize so many relationships where two people are slowly suffocating each other with love that's really just disguised possession. After the war, Sartre became one of the most famous intellectuals in the world, his existentialism becoming a cultural movement that influenced literature, film, politics, and how people thought about their lives and choices. He was endlessly productive, writing philosophy, novels, plays, political essays, always engaged with the pressing issues of his time. He supported revolutionary movements, opposed colonialism, criticized both capitalism and Soviet communism. Used his platform and his pen to fight for freedom and justice as he understood them. In 1964, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, one of the highest honors a writer can receive, and he refused it. He didn't want to be turned into an institution, didn't want to be domesticated by official recognition, didn't want his freedom as a writer to be compromised by the prestige and expectations that come with such prizes. Even in his relationship to success and recognition, he was trying to resist being turned into an object, being defined and possessed by the cultural machinery that wants to classify and control even its rebels. His relationship with Beauvoir continued until his death in 1980. A complex, 5-decade partnership that included profound intellectual collaboration, genuine love, mutual manipulation, other lovers, jealousies, power struggles, and a commitment that survived all the contradictions and difficulties. They never married, never lived together full-time, maintained their pact of freedom even as they often violated its spirit through possessiveness and control. In many ways, their relationship embodied the very contradictions Sartre wrote about, the tension between freedom and connection, between authenticity and bad faith, between the desire for independence and the desire for intimate recognition from another consciousness. Beauvoir wrote about their relationship in her memoirs and letters, offering a perspective that sometimes confirmed and sometimes complicated Sartre's philosophical views on love and freedom. She loved him, resented him, was shaped by him, influenced him, competed with him, collaborated with him. All the messy reality of two strong personalities trying to love each other without destroying each other's freedom. And if you're starting to question your own relationships, your own patterns of loving and being loved, your own bad faith and inauthenticity, leave your like on this video so more people can discover Sartre's thought. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos about the philosophers who changed how we see the world. The relevance of Sartre's analysis today is perhaps even greater than when he first wrote about these dynamics. We live in an age of social media, where the look of the other has been multiplied and intensified to an almost unbearable degree. You're not just being seen by your partner, you're being seen by hundreds or thousands of people, constantly judging, evaluating, defining you through their screens and their likes and their comments. The project of creating yourself as an object for others, of performing an identity that will be validated and loved, has become a full-time job for many people. And in romantic relationships, the same patterns Sartre identified have been amplified by technology and changing social norms. We have more freedom to choose our partners, to leave unsatisfying relationships, to explore different forms of connection. But we also have more anxiety, more fear of missing out, more constant comparison, more ways to surveil and control each other. Dating apps reduce people to images and brief descriptions, to objects to be swiped left or right. Social media allows us to track our partner's every move and interaction. The tools of connection have become tools of objectification and control, making authentic love even more difficult to achieve. But Sartre would say that this just makes his philosophy more necessary, not less. The solution isn't better technology or different social arrangements, though those might help. The solution is confronting the fundamental existential reality of human freedom and the anguish that comes with it. You suffer in love, not primarily because you chose the wrong person, or because communication failed, or because you have unresolved trauma, though all those things might be true. You suffer because you're trying to use love to escape from freedom, to find a fixed identity, to avoid the responsibility and anguish of creating yourself. And the other person is doing the same thing, and you're both failing. And that failure manifests as all the petty cruelties, manipulations, jealousies, and quiet deaths that fill relationships where love has turned into possession. The path forward isn't to give up on love, but to transform how you love. Stop trying to be completed by someone else. Stop trying to capture their freedom. Stop performing a version of yourself designed to keep their validation. Stop making their look into the foundation of your identity. Start accepting your own freedom, your own anguish, your own responsibility for creating meaning and purpose in your life. Start seeing the other person as a free subject rather than as an object to meet your needs. Start choosing them freely rather than needing them desperately. This is incredibly difficult because it goes against everything our culture teaches about love, against all the romantic narratives you've internalized, against the deep psychological patterns formed in childhood when you first learned that love might be conditional on performing the right version of yourself. But difficulty doesn't mean impossibility. And the alternative is to keep suffering in the same patterns, to keep destroying what you love through the very act of loving it wrong. Sartre died in April 1980, and 50,000 people followed his funeral procession through the streets of Paris. An extraordinary outpouring of respect and affection for a man who had spent his life insisting on uncomfortable truths about human existence. He left behind a massive body of work, unfinished projects, contradictions, insights that still challenge how we think about freedom, responsibility, authenticity, and human relationships. His philosophy doesn't offer comfort or easy answers, but it offers something perhaps more valuable: a clear-eyed analysis of why we suffer, why our relationships so often become prisons, why love can turn into hell. And embedded in that dark analysis is the possibility of something better, not a perfect solution, but a more honest and free way of being with others, a way that respects the irreducible freedom of every consciousness instead of trying to capture and control it. If you made it this far, it's because something inside you is seeking answers that the world around you can't provide. This restlessness you feel, this sensation that there's something more authentic waiting for you, it's not weakness. It's the first sign that you're ready for real transformation. This channel exists exactly for people like you, who don't settle for shallow answers and who have the courage to look within, even when it hurts. Here, every week, I bring new videos exploring the philosophers who can illuminate the path you're walking, always with the same depth and care you saw here. It's not about accumulating empty knowledge, it's about finding real tools to live with more freedom, authenticity, and purpose. Subscribing to the channel is a small act, but it can be the beginning of a journey that will completely change how you see yourself and your choices. And you don't have to do this alone. There's an entire community here in the comments, people who feel what you feel, who fight the same struggles. Click that subscribe button, activate the notification bell, and let's go together on this search for a life truly worth living. You deserve this clarity. You deserve this freedom.